Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, a really mind-bending topic, what actually goes on inside the brain of a genius. We've got some fascinating material here exploring this idea of a special network in the brain, one that's linked to really exceptional intellectual abilities. And we're using a pretty unique case study, Albert Einstein. We want to see if science can give us a peek into the neurological roots of, well, his brilliance.
Exactly. We'll be focusing specifically on observations made of Einstein's actual brain after he passed away, looking for, structural differences, any quirks, and trying to connect those dots to the uh, the cognitive superpowers that let him completely reshape how we understand reality.
Right.
So yeah, our goal today is to figure out which brain areas might have been key players in his genius, what those areas generally do, and based on the information we have, what made his brain stand out.
Okay, let's dive right in then. Our sources talk about a collection of brain regions, often labeled as a kind of genius area.
Yeah.
Can you give us the lay of the land there?
Sure. So the main areas that keep coming up in this context are the inferior precuneus, the retrosplenial cortex, and the posterior cingulate cortex.
Okay.
Now, what makes these particular areas interesting is that they're deeply involved in the brain's, let's say, higher level thinking.
Higher level thinking.
Yeah.
Like what specifically?
We're talking about things like really advanced visuospatial abilities. That ability to really picture complex things in your mind's eye. Also, abstract reasoning, and that critical skill of integrating diverse bits of information, pulling things together to spark new insights.
Which, yeah, when you think about Einstein, that just fits perfectly, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the person who fundamentally changed our view of the entire universe.
Right.
He gave us the theory of special relativity way back in 1905.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, building on some earlier work, sure. But then he developed general relativity pretty much on his own, publishing that in 1916.
A monumental achievement.
Absolutely.
Oh.
And we can't forget the Nobel Prize for explaining the photoelectric effect. This wasn't just incremental stuff. It was a whole new way of seeing things.
Precisely. And when scientists actually got the chance to study Einstein's brain physically after his death, they did notice some unusual features.
Ah, okay. So what did they find?
Well, one of the first people to really examine it was a neuroscientist named Harvey. And he observed a couple of things. First, the absence of a part of the parietal lobe called the parietal operculum.
Mm-hmm.
And second, he noted that a major groove on the side of the brain, the lateral sulcus, sometimes called the Sylvian fissure.
Right, like a deep fold in the brain.
Exactly. Think of it like a valley. Harvey noted that this sulcus, or fissure, seems shorter than what you typically see in an average brain.
A shorter lateral sulcus. Okay, that sounds like it could be significant. What might a difference like that actually mean? Functionally, or maybe in terms of how the brain developed?
Well, the information we're looking at suggests that a shorter lateral sulcus might have allowed for more significant growth, potentially, in the areas around it, specifically the posterior parietal region that's involved in spatial stuff and attention, and also the dorsomedial temporal region, which plays a role in memory and integrating sensory information. So basically, if that main groove didn't extend as far, the thinking goes, the brain tissue nearby might have had, well, more room to expand and maybe form more connections.
Interesting. So like a structural difference potentially enabling more developed functions in nearby zones. Now, the material also mentions something called the zeid brain or insular brain. That sounds intriguing. What's that about?
Yeah, the zeid brain, as it's described in our source, is proposed as a kind of central hub for learning transfer.
Learning transfer. You mean like taking knowledge from one context and applying it somewhere else?
Exactly that. Taking what you learn in one situation and effectively using it in a new, maybe unrelated situation. And its location is described as being beneath the insular region of the forebrain, right within that lateral sulcus, that groove we were just discussing. It's sometimes referred to as an insular box, and it includes several key structures, the insular cortex itself, of course, but also the basal ganglia, important for motor control, habits, learning, the thalamus, which is like the brain's main relay station for sensory info, the internal capsule, which is a dense bundle of nerve fibers, and the corona radiata, these white matter pathways connecting different brain areas.
Wow, so it's like a major intersection right under the surface, a central switchboard for learning connections, maybe?
Right.
And what about the insula itself? The source lists a surprisingly wide range of functions for it.
Oh, absolutely. The insula is a real multitasker, it seems. It's thought to be involved in our conscious awareness, how we regulate emotions, even basic bodily balance homeostasis. but also higher level things like compassion, empathy, perception, motor control,
Self-awareness, too.
self-awareness, cognitive functioning, even how we experience interacting with other people. It's incredibly diverse. And what's particularly interesting here is the potential link back to that shorter Sylvian fissure in Einstein's brain. Well, the idea presented is that perhaps more extensive growth in the insular radiation, those white matter pathways connected to the insula, might have actually contributed to that fissure being shorter during development. Like, if you have more wiring, maybe it pushes things around a bit, influencing the final physical structure.
Huh. More connections leading to a different overall brain shape in that area. And the source also notes the insula connects to the limbic system, the amygdala, hippocampus, cingulate cortex, key for emotion and memory, plus the basal ganglia and thalamus. It really sounds like it's plugged into everything.
Exactly. It's very centrally located and connected. Now, let's maybe circle back to that genius area concept we started with. Where exactly is this supposed to be located, and what are its key features according to the material?
Right, the location. The source places it between the splenium and the corpus callosum. That's the back part of the big fiber bundle connecting the two brain hemispheres, right? And the parieto-occipital sulcus, that's another groove, separating the parietal lobe, sensory processing, spatial stuff, from the occipital lobe, which is mainly for vision.
Okay, so nestled between those landmarks.
Yeah. It emphasizes again that the main players in this specific genius area network are the posterior cingulate cortex, the retrosplenial cortex, and the precuneus.
And significantly, the observations of Einstein's brain specifically indicated that, at least in the right hemisphere, both the posterior cingulate cortex and the precuneus were reportedly larger and perhaps more developed than average.
It is more developed, okay.
There was also mention of notable growth, specifically in the lower part of the precuneus, and this growth might have even pushed that parieto-occipital sulcus, the border with the visual area, physically closer to the visual cortex itself.
Wow, so potentially altering the very geography of his brain in that region. And that sulcus, the parieto-occipital one, it was also different structurally, wasn't it?
That's what was observed, yes. Reportedly longer and oriented differently, more vertical and horizontal parts, compared to what's typically seen, which is often shorter and more slanted.
These are quite specific anatomical observations.
They are. Now let's try and understand what these components do. What function is associated with the precuneus?
Okay, the precuneus, the source links it to visuospatial learnography, which sounds like maybe mapping out knowledge visually and spatially, almost like creating mental landscapes for ideas.
That's a good way to put it, like an internal conceptual map.
It also highlights it as a source of metacognition for deep learning transfer. So thinking about how you learn to help you learn better in new situations, that sounds pretty crucial for genius-level thinking. Plus, it's involved in attention and general awareness. So not just taking info in, but actively processing it, being aware of it, and applying it.
Right. Very active, high-level processing. And what about the posterior cingulate cortex, the PCC?
That's identified as a central hub, a major node, in the brain's default mode network, the DMN, along with the medial prefrontal cortex and the angular gyrus.
Ah, the DMN. That's the network active when our mind is wandering, right, not focused on an external task.
Exactly. Involves in things like daydreaming, self-reflection, maybe retrieving memories, envisioning the future, kind of connecting different ideas internally. And interestingly, the source notes that the PCC in Einstein's brain reportedly showed higher cerebral blood flow and metabolic activity.
Meaning it was working harder, more active.
Seems like it. And also very extensive intrinsic connectivity, meaning it was potentially communicating more robustly with many other parts of the brain. Suggests a very busy internal thought laboratory, perhaps.
Which implies it could be highly influential, constantly integrating information, maybe sparking connections even when he wasn't, consciously working on a problem.
Okay, and the last piece of this trio, the retrosplenial cortex. That one seems critical for memory formation and also navigation. And not just physical navigation, like finding your way around town, but maybe navigating abstract concepts too.
That's plausible. It's involved in imagining future scenarios as well and processing visual scenes. Apparently, it's quite responsive to stable, permanent cues in the environment, helping us orient ourselves spatially, which likely feeds into that visuospatial mapping, that learnography associated with the precuneus.
So it's like your internal GPS, maybe for both physical space and idea space.
Could be. Helping to place things in context, form memories, and imagine possibilities based on those contexts. So if we try to sort of pull this all together. The proposed function of this whole genius area, the PCC, retrosplenial cortex, precuneus, seems to be acting as a central nexus, a hub for really high-level cognitive processes.
A place where everything comes together.
Yeah, where different ideas can be synthesized, where complex mental models are built up, and maybe where unexpected connections are made between concepts that seem totally separate to most people. This enhanced ability to perceive really complex relationships, maybe that's what underpinned the ability to develop such revolutionary theories.
It's almost like these regions, working together perhaps more efficiently or differently, gave him a unique way of seeing the universe's underlying structure. And the source does briefly mention factors influencing this area, right? It's not just about the brain structure you're born with.
No, exactly. It touches on the classic trio, genetics, definitely playing a role,
Yeah.
but also environment and critically extensive, dedicated learning and practice. So it underscores that his incredible insights weren't just about having a differently wired brain, but also about decades of intense focus and work.
Right. Nature and nurture working together.
hmm And it ties Einstein's lifelong quest, studying the laws of the universe, creating relativity, even Safami's section. It links that deep intellectual work directly back to the activity within the specific network, the precuneus, retrosplenial cortex, and posterior cingulate cortex.
So, to kind of wrap up our deep dive here, it seems Einstein's brain really did show some notable structural differences, particularly things like that potentially larger inferior precuneus, maybe that shorter lateral sulcus allowing other areas to develop. These variations, along with a suggested enhanced development and activity in this genius area, offer some pretty compelling hints about the neurological basis for his, well, extraordinary thinking.
They absolutely do. But, and this is really crucial, we have to remember that while these observations are fascinating, the link between specific brain structures and something as complex and multifaceted as genius is, well, it's still really complex. It's an active area of research, and there are still so many unknowns. We're looking at correlations, potential influences, not necessarily a simple cause and effect.
Absolutely. It's a piece of the puzzle, not the whole picture. And it definitely makes you wonder, doesn't it? If we get a better handle on these specific brain regions and how they work together, what could that mean for how we approach learning in the future? Or how we nurture creativity or support people with exceptional potential?
Yeah, the implications could be significant.
And it also makes you think what other parts of the brain, maybe areas we haven't even focused on as much yet, might also play a critical role in those truly world-changing insights. Definitely gives you a lot to chew on. Thanks for exploring the depths with us today.